Hello and welcome to Good Who Bad Who. This is a series where I look at an episode or episodes of my favourite television programme of all time, Doctor Who, and give my verdict on whether or not it counts as an example of Good Who or Bad Who in my opinion. The trope of an immortal becoming mortal, or God becoming human, is not new to works of fiction. The most famous one I can think of at the moment is Superman 2. And when I say that I mean both versions, the Lester cut and the Donner cut. The second example I think of is Doctor Who's take on it, Human Nature by Paul Cornell. Originally written as a book for the Virgin New Adventures range during the Wilderness years, for those who don't know, that's the era before the 1996 TV movie and after it from 1989 to 2005, when Doctor Who wasn't being broadcast. Human Nature would later be adapted into a two-part adventure for the Doctor, as played by David Tennant, and Martha by Freema Agyeman, broadcast as part of the revival's third series in 2007. At the time of recording this, 10 years since. For the record, I have read the book, and I think it's very good. There are a few things that don't gel with me. I've never taken to the whole Doctor Who for adults thing, but that's for another time. Still, I can see why it was considered a strong enough story for the show proper. I think it has a lot of potential, and I'm surprised that Who never touched upon this idea before. I'm just going to lay some ground rules here. This video isn't about the original source material, and I'm only going to compare the episodes with the book if I feel it's relevant to the point I'm making. Also, to simplify, I'm going to refer to the television story as Human Nature rather than go Human Nature the Family of Blood for convenience sake. The reason why I'm not comparing Human Nature the novel to Human Nature the television story is that I don't think it's fair on either one, and they're both very, very different. Anyways, Paul Cornell is a writer I have a lot of respect for, and this is his second contribution to televised Doctor Who. He'd previously written the emotional series One Tale, Father's Day, which must have, understandably, been strong enough to give him the chance to write another story. I'm happy with that. As of 2017, when this has been recorded, like I said, it's his last contribution to Doctor Who on television, which is a pity. Perhaps the greatest strength of the episode is how it opens. As Frank would say, it's a cracker. We're flung in at the deep end as the Doctor and Martha escape to the TARDIS trying to lose the family. Charles Palmer directs the scene superbly. It's got a quick pace, but it's also able to get across exposition in a way that doesn't distract. What I like about this, too, is that it makes a logical leap to the Fobwatch MacGuffin. The Doctor plays every card he has before coming to the realization that they are just as capable of travelling in time as he is, and, as the man himself puts it, they're never going to stop. One could argue that the cut to John Smith dreaming is a bit cheap, as it drops everything to make you think the episode conforms to the cliche of "it was all a dream." I disagree. It's a misdirection. We imagine the scene will play out in full, but instead we change over to the naive Smith dismissing the reality as a dream, and a beautifully ironic line before the main titles roll. But more intense performance later. In a nutshell, the opening succeeds in grabbing the audience's attention. You want to find out how it's going to play out. I know I did watching it as a kid. My only complaint is more of a nitpick than anything else. The editor here recycles a shot from New Earth of the Doctor in the TARDIS, and now you'll never unsee that. But sure, feck it, it's television. They reuse props, actors and sound effects all the time. Sometimes you notice it, sometimes you don't. Human Nature's setting is reminiscent of a story from Peter Davison's tenure. It's a quiet countryside far removed from space opera or noisy city life. It's perhaps more fitting that we begin the story not in the year when World War I begins, but the year before, since it allows for some poignant lines from Martha and later on the Family of Blood. What I appreciate in both versions, but more so the TV one, is that it does not attempt to disguise the attitudes and racism of the time. Martha gets a nasty comment from Hutchinson. John Smith talks down to her based on cultural differences. The Crimean War veteran groans when he sees her approaching the entrance. Jenny, when chatting to Martha, mentions your country. Also, Joan can't take seriously the idea that Martha is training to become a doctor based on her skin colour. Notable is the scene where Smith's class are practicing with the machine gun. Tim's comment on the morality of killing humans with less advanced weaponry is met with derision from the headmaster and rewarded with physical abuse from his peer. Even worse, John Smith agrees to it. Of course, nothing is shown on screen, but what is said paints a very clear picture, and that's enough. Before I continue with this, I just want to get it out of the way. I think it makes much more sense to have the doctor's essence being placed inside a pocket watch. In the book, it's a kind of cricket ball, but in the television show, like, I think it's just more fitting. It ties in better with the mythology of the Time Lords, and it just it just makes more sense having the Doctor's soul, the Doctor as a Time Lord, having his soul put into a watch, which is a way of telling time, and the look of it is amazing. Like I really like it. I'd love to I'd love to pick up the replica. I notice I haven't talked about the performances so far. I think I'd better do it now before it's too late. The main cast of Human Nature, they're brilliant. I'll come back to David and Freema's performances a little later on, but long story short, they're both on top form. Pip Torrance as Rocastle, the headmaster, he does a good job. Harry Lloyd from Game of Thrones is in this. He plays a really great dickhead as Baines. But he also gives a really memorable performance as Son of Mine. He goes very over the top, but it's far from the bad kind in my book. The rest of the family, Father of Mine, played by Gerard Horan, Mother of Mine by Rebecca Staten. I hope I've said her name correctly, and Lauren Wilson as Dora Mine. They do well at being eerie, nasty piece of work. You know, the family would definitely deserve to be remembered as one of Modern Who's most interesting villains. I also think Thomas Sangster brings a lot to the role that Stephen King-esque psychic kid Tim, but the best actor out of all is Jessica Hines as Nurse Joan Redfern. She's a great actor playing a really great character, and you have a lot of sympathy for her. You know, she works well with David Tennant. You know, even though the first part's only 45 minutes long, you know they make how John Smith and Joan fall in love. They make it seem so natural, and I don't know whether it's Paul Cornell or Russell T Davies doing an uncredited rewrite, but either way, I really like how they did that. I adore the moment where he shows her the Journal of Impossible Things. It's a significant part in the whole story in that John is becoming more open to her, but like the opening is poignantly ironic that he still believes it to be fantasy. The journal as well is a great prop with text by Paul Cornell and artwork from Kellyanne Walker. This is an evolution of a scene in the novel where John Smith writes a children's story inspired by the Doctor's life and eventual escape from Gallifrey. The previous Doctors get their first visual confirmation here, but it's not made explicit in dialogue. I wish it was. Like maybe there was a moment where John says that the most peculiar dreams he has are the ones where, as the Doctor, he has more than one face, and that he wears them like masks, but he's unsure why he's hiding behind them. But I get it. You want to keep the story focused, and drawing attention to that would have distracted. I want to keep this review focused, but I'm just going over a few little bits in part one I really like. The reveal of the scarecrows is straight out of Doctor Who's heyday, as they attack the farmer who someone I know once mistook for Pat Mustard from Father Ted. God, can you imagine? The moment where Tim takes the book from John Smith and sees who and what he really is never fails to give me chills, as does the unearthly, almost supernatural nature of the watch. They do a future shock with Martha from Tim's perspective too, but its impact isn't lessened at all. There's a cool musical nod to a Sylvester McCoy story, take a wild guess which one, and a beautiful reference to Doctor Who, the programme's parents. There are many more I'd like to talk about, but I don't have the time. Watch it more than once, and if you're a massive fan like me, hopefully you'll see them. Human nature as a whole is really subtle with hints towards the series' long story arc. The one that's in the foreground is the fob watch, which plays a part 2 episodes down the road, but there are others in the background. The fob watch tells Tim, "You are not alone," and "To Be a Pilgrim" plays, whose lyrics include the title of Master. I think that's about it. Let me know if I've missed any. I'm not sure what else I can talk about before I move on to part 2. Well, I guess the invisible ship is reminiscent of Wonder Woman's invisible jet, and the scene when it lands kind of reminds me of an old 50s B movie. It's probably put in my head because the color green, the particular shade of green. There's a dark yet witty line when Son of Mine tells the veteran, "I didn't spare you," when he asks him to spare a penny, which precedes a really weird moment where Son of Mine disintegrates the veteran by shooting him in the groin. And then a brilliantly silly moment where Father of Mine walks into the dance hall and gets everyone's attention by throwing down a coat stand. "Yeah, fuck your hats and coats, I don't give two shits about your human stuff, no?" The build-up to the cliffhanger is probably better than the cliffhanger itself. The pieces are all going to collide, they're all going to mesh together at this dance hall, but the most significant one of all, in my opinion, is when Martha shows John the sonic screwdriver and tells him he's not real. He might dismiss it at this point in time, but that won't last. The first part of this story is solid. It does what you hope from the best of Doctor Who. The plot has its complexities, but not to the point of drowning in it, and stays true to what makes the show one of the best things on television. There's a main cast of competent actors, and it's engaging, and that I think is the most important part. On to the second part, the family of blood. This is a turning point for the story, where it goes from being a solid work by a great writer to quite possibly one of the finest examples of Doctor Who ever made. I could talk about this one for hours and hours, but I have to have control. In part 2, the story doesn't make any stupid decisions to begin with. The cliffhanger is resolved in a way that doesn't boggle the mind, doesn't cheat, just gets on with it, and it gives Martha a chance to show what she's worth by confronting the family. What I love about this story is that John Smith keeps denying what he's seeing and any sense that he's the Doctor. It's a beautiful reverse. The Doctor should confront the challenge of aliens trying to do whatever, head on. He would use his rational mind to get out of the situation, but John tries so desperately to cling on to his fabricated life, even though it's crumbling around him. That bit where he looks at the TARDIS from afar and says without true conviction, "I've never seen it before," it just says it all. Now, is this Russell's idea? Is it Paul's? Who gives a shit? It's brilliant. I like how Tim is absolutely scared of, but over time becomes more like the Doctor, with the exposure to his soul in the watch, and once again refuses to fight. Speaking of which, when the school has to arm itself against the coming of the Scarecrows, it's an outstanding display. I love the montage and the piece by Murray Gold, just Scarecrows towards. Brilliant. And seeing all the boys struggle to hold their composure at the prospect of having to take lives, and the weight of guilt vanishing when they find out they're just animated, that they're fake. I can't do justice by talking about it. It has to be seen to be believed. Remember when I said I'd get back to Tennant? Well, I'm here now. David's performance as both the Doctor and John Smith is a highlight of this story and his time in the lead role. There is no confusion of characters. You know full well which one is the Time Lord and which one's the human. Characterization of John Smith is a massive divergence from the novel. In that, the McCoy Doctor's version of Smith is a man out of time, too nice for the dark world of school teaching of the early 20th century, but in this, John Smith is a man of the times. He may still have something of the Doctor in him, in that he doesn't fire his weapon when they have to defend the school, like I've discussed previously, but I think it works so much better. I don't say that because it's more accurate, but it draws a clear line between the wonder and darkness of the Doctor to the mundane and dated views of Smith.